I stand before you as a utility worker, and what I wanted to do was two things: reflect a little bit about what it is to be a utility worker faced with a very changing world, and then secondly, talk to you a bit about what Horizon Power is doing to address some of the issues that it sees. These are a typical group of our customers. What they're seeing is pretty significant bills, almost twice. I think they live in the north, so they're seeing consumption levels that are twice the national average and bills that are twice the national average. So they're getting up to 5-6% of a sort of post-tax income. Pretty significant. And if I was to ask that customer group what they thought of us as a utility, historically they would have seen us as being reliable. They would have seen us as being somehow wedded in the past. And when it comes to the future, they're very much of two minds. One is this a self-interested blocker because of the issues that they see on the ground? Or secondly, is this somebody that can be trusted as a custodian of the common system that's going to help them navigate what is going to be a fairly significant transition? That's the kind of issue I think that we face, and it comes off a historical background where to the utility, over the last 100 years, customers have effectively been passive nodes on a system. We've known them by meter numbers or by invoice numbers, and in fact, they sit at the heart of what is a wonderful machine. The National Academy of Engineers in the United States talked about the grid there, and it's probably the same for the grid here, as being a marvel of engineering excellence coming out of the 20th century. And engineers, which are fully kind of embedded in utilities, would really run these perfectly. If it wasn't for weather historically, if it wasn't for machines breaking down historically, and into the future, it's all of this technology disruption that's coming along, and it's all the customer expectations that are going to need to be managed. And we have, through reform, we have changed. We are starting to embrace customers. We're seeing customers being different. Hilma introduced competition, and we've embraced competition. And we've done it almost as a first step. And we've bombarded our customers with a whole lot of information. So they have got information coming out of their ears. And effectively, the only thing that one guarantees by providing a lot of information, a lot of choices to customers, is you probably guarantee the safe passage of the HMS inertia travelling safely into the future. Really, it is a case of more is less. And we're starting to learn what it is to actually understand our customers. Again, from the customer perspective, if you were to look at what's happening at the commanding heights, and I take Michael's point that policy is getting better, but it certainly has been very messy. It has been historically reactive, but there's a long way to go on this transition. Recall that CSIRO and the Electricity Networks Association talk about a very different electricity future evolving over the next 30, 40 years. So, in the context of 30, 40 years, we are starting to look at policy and starting to anticipate a different future. So I think it does bode well, but we're starting off from, really having confused and probably frustrated the customer base. In terms of our customers, we're getting to realise that they're not robotic, they're not analytical, they're not rational, and they don't sit around looking at marginal cost, marginal revenue to make their decisions. We're starting to understand that they could be human, that they could be emotionally driven by some of the decisions that they make. And so we, as we go down this path that many retail organisations, airline organisations have followed, we're starting to engage our customer base. And Paula, we are starting to use reference groups. And we are calling people together on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. for a barbecue to talk about energy reliability, energy safety, energy affordability. And guess what? People may not be turning up, but we would have to ask ourselves the question, why? And if people do turn up, we'd have to ask the question, is this truly a representative group? So what is really interesting to us may not be interesting to the general population of customers. So we are learning. And again, this is certainly a debate that we have within my business, where the customer of tomorrow is still coming. And they will either evolve, or if you can imagine the Terminator movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger being teleported, suddenly they will appear amongst us. And this customer is going to be all-trusting, highly engaged, is going to be cashed up. And what's more, they are going to want, because they are a pro-consumer, to actually take cash and collect energy devices and trade. Well, that may be the case for some of us, but I don't think it's going to be the case for the general population. So we have this debate, and I think where we've come to is that the customer of tomorrow is actually here, as Karen Stenner would tell us from CSIRO. And in fact, the customer that is here right now actually longs for the customer experience of yesterday, where energy just happened, it was boring, it was reliable, and it didn't occupy any of our headspace. John talked about this. I just want to make a couple of comments here. John talked about this delicate system, which is the energy system. As an engineer, and I have this conversation with my colleagues, the system that we've inherited had a lot of redundancy, and we have busily been feasting on that in terms of adding things to it, almost in an ad hoc fashion. So centralised intermittent generation, down to distributed intermittent generation. We've seen some of the issues, certainly nationally, that we've hit in terms of maintaining the balance between thermal and intermittent generation. We in Horizon and our microgrids have seen the impact of distributed energy, which I suspect will also impact on the bigger grids. But we in some of our towns have had the issue where we've had to limit the take-up of DER because it does cause power quality issues. We do need to understand its impact on the system, and we do need to reinvest in the system to actually make sure that we're starting to harness and orchestrate that distributed energy resource. The energy system is certainly going to change. It is going to become distributed. It is going to become digitalised. And we, similar to the work that CSIRO have done, envisage that for our systems, when we get to another 20, 30 years out, 2/3 of them are going to be predominantly distributed energy systems, where more than 50% of the energy is served by the customers themselves. And in many cases, we're going to have off-grid systems where that becomes a real cost-competitive option. The interesting thing is that you always speculate about the future and what customers might actually want to do. And one of these issues here is, this pro-consumer. How many of them will there be? And can one imagine sort of 10, 11 million customers across the country actually actively trading energy to actually probably deliver a benefit of $100, $200 on their bill over the course of a year? Probably not. On the other hand, are they going to have the confidence in aggregators or agents or utilities to actually set and forget? Maybe, maybe not. There will be some in that, but there will be a spectrum across, that broad range. We in Horizon, in terms of our strategy, have some kind of, simplicity to it. We operate remote towns, so we operate a series of 40 remote microgrids. What we've come to realise in those remote microgrids is that we're lightly regulated, we're vertically integrated, we're high cost. So they actually represent a wonderful opportunity to look at the technology that we can adapt and refine, particularly when it comes to the orchestration of DER, working closely with customers, regulatory frameworks that actually encourage the take-up of the lowest average cost solution, where that includes DER, and also pricing reform that actually accurately reflects the signal to the customer so they make a choice that's good for them and that's ultimately good for the system. So we've got the ability to do a lot of what's difficult to do in the heavily regulated, differentially owned systems that exist across the country. We're doing a lot of things. They are focused, all the things that we do across our 40 systems are focused on delivering, on building capability, competency, experience to actually deliver a distributed energy future. So some of the things we've been doing for 10, 15 years is we've been replacing thermal generation with wind and solar. We've been experimenting with storage devices going back 10 years, flywheels, lead acid, the last 2 to 3 years, lithium-ion batteries. These are all important to actually get the level of renewable energy to high levels. We're also on the back of a fire in Esperance in November, December 2015. Rather than replace a whole lot of poles, that were taken out by the fire. We worked closely with some of our customers that were on very stringy, long lines, and rather than replace the lines, we've given them contemporary hybrid power systems that are off the grid completely. So we haven't rebuilt the lines. We've worked with them to configure battery, solar, diesel backup stations that actually provide them with, in most cases, a more reliable service that they had in the past. Other things we're doing in terms of renewing contracts on many of our systems, we have a view that each of our systems has its own unique blueprint that takes it from what it has today in terms of energy infrastructure to an endpoint out to 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on the system, most likely highly distributed. And we look at the decisions that we make today and into the future based on how we think that town is going to progress to its end state. So contracts, investment in infrastructure are all influenced by that longer term view on where we think the town will get to. We also are having a look at multi-flow networks. So if you could imagine building distributed energy into a system, greenfield system today, what would the underlying network look like? Well, we can see that you can probably get a saving of anywhere between 15 to 25%. It looks lighter, there are less transformers, it's got different configuration, it's more intelligent, but it does substantially look different. But again, the challenge for all of our utilities is how do you migrate? Because how do you migrate from what you have to build in that kind of benefit? And you can't simply do it overnight. You've got a vested investment already in infrastructure on the ground. Maybe not. Let me just go back one more. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is we've deployed smart meters, and we have also deployed a pricing methodology that we have rolled out and are experimenting now within 2 of our towns. And basically it prices the peak and it prices the peak, and it's based on a telco type structure which has a fixed component and a very modest variable component. But more importantly, it's putting control back in the hands of customers. So we are feeding customers with real-time consumption information through an app on a smartphone. They've got the ability to have a look based on their knowledge of what's operating in the house at this stage to actually take action, to stay within the confines of a plan that they may have chosen. And we have found in the first trial of this that we did in Port Hedland that we reduced the peak working with the customer group by 20%. We're now rolling it out through Hedland and also Broome. The intention that is over the next year or two, as we gather the information, work with a lot of people to actually assess the value of the information, the structure of the plan, that we roll that out more broadly. And that is, something that's really quite important because it ultimately will give the correct price signal to customers as they deploy DER, but more importantly, bring the alignment about which we need between the utilities and the customers that they serve. And at the moment, there are a lot of issues there that sort of put us at loggerheads. And this is one issue that does need to be addressed. In terms of our customers in Broome, we're doing work with them as well. So we were doing a piece of work with the major land developer in Western Australia, Landcorp. And the issue that we looked at is if you bring a subdivision in and you build DER into the subdivision from the beginning, what does that mean for the network that you need in the subdivision? What does it mean for the connection back to the main system? And we've been able to reduce the headwork charges quite considerably, working with the customers and working with the developers. So again, this is a pilot. We hope to roll this out again, and hopefully it becomes part of the way that we continue to develop blocks of land across the state. That's basically it. Thank you.